My name is Michael Kaufman. I've worked for the past 40 years around the world with the United Nations and governments and companies and educators, NGOs, to promote women's rights, to work to end violence against women, and to positively transform the lives of men. I read a lot. I write both nonfiction and fiction, novels, and that's me. One of my most recent books is called The Male Ally Handbook. And it's a short book. It's a book that's meant to be a resource both for men who want to be an ally with women in their workplace and community, but also for women who are trying to figure out what's a better way to engage the men around us. In that book are a couple of articles specifically about engaging men in the STEM fields to be allies, and some of the specific challenges and barriers that the men in the sciences face and that women in the sciences face in particular. Back in 1991, 2 years after the massacre of 14 women at the École Polytechnique in Montreal, two women challenged two men I knew. Olivia Chow challenged her husband, Jack. Jan Peltier challenged her husband, Ron Slusser, to do something, as men. And they approached me and they said, why don't we issue a statement, do something? And what I felt very strongly is that we needed more than just a few men speaking out. We really needed to find a way for men in our millions to take a stand against gender-based violence. And within a few weeks, we started something that became the White Ribbon Campaign. And it actually spread to about 90 countries. And I think most Canadians don't know that this little Canadian idea spread around the world in very different forms in different countries. But the idea was very simple. Men needed to speak out. We needed to find ways to reach our brothers, our sons, our fathers, our friends with a very simple message that violence against women was very much an issue. And that model of male, we didn't use the phrase male allyship back then, but that's what it was, a big tent approach where we said, come together in spite of whatever differences we might have on 1,000 different issues. Let's come together and speak with one voice on this one. So right now we have a problem. And that problem is the spread of misogyny in the virtual world, and on the internet, what sometimes gets called the manosphere. And, there's a lot of men who are searching, a lot of young men particularly, who are seeing the world change, not necessarily in good ways, are looking for answers. And unfortunately, there are purveyors of hatred, there's purveyors of privilege that have enormous influence. And they spread hate. And so we're up against a lot. And I think one of the things that we really need to do, and starting with young people, is working to develop cultural literacy, but also to provide honest alternatives. When I say honest, I mean, how do we create spaces where men, young and old, can have an authentic conversation? Can look at some of the issues that challenge us. And I think that if we pretend that change is easy or simple, we're doing everyone a disservice. I think we need to acknowledge that these changes are difficult ones, they're challenging ones, they're necessary ones. It's essential that those in groups who have had disproportionate privilege or power, people with my skin color, for example. And I speak this not out of some sort of collective guilt or collective blame, but out of collective responsibility for change. This is collective love for the women in our lives. We want to live in a country, we want to live in a world in which no one is experiencing violence in their home or at work, or is worried about getting to work at night and what's going to happen. But I also think that we're living in a moment of incredibly positive change. The biggest example for me around men's and women's lives is on the transformation of fatherhood, which I've written about quite a bit, because it's an area that we've really been redefining not only women's roles in the home and work, but men's roles in lives as well. And as many men are discovering, it's a very positive thing. As hard as it is to take on half of the work in the home or more, it's also can be a very positive thing. We're in a situation where there are so many men who are now supportive of women's rights, who speak out in the workplace, who speak out for girls in sports and in education. I was at a basketball game last night, a Raptors game, and one of the many announcements that blare at you was on supporting girls in sports. So that would have been unheard of 20, 30, 40 years ago, or would have been so marginal. So one of the things that we are seeing is more and more men who are speaking out. One of the things that is so important in our workplaces, and I say this to everyone, but particularly to men, is see yourself as a leader. See yourself as a leader for diversity, for inclusion, for the empowerment of women, for the advancement of women, and everyone who has historically been held back. So that leadership is important. And whether it's on the shop floor or from the corner office, men really recasting themselves as leaders for equality, fighting, speaking out is critical. But what is most important in all of this, in being an ally, is not what we think. It's what we do. It is about what I do, what I say. Being an ally means making sure that our workplaces are developing the policies that we need, whether it's policies around hiring and advancement of women, around pay equality, it's policies around the impact of gender-based violence in the workplace, which is an area that most people still don't know about. I certainly didn't until I started working with a group of researchers just a few years ago on the impact of gender-based violence at work. It means making sure that our workplaces have good training on all these different policies. Policies are great, but if we don't have good training and repeat the training, policies mean nothing. We have to bring those policies into our performance evaluations. We have to audit our workplaces and companies to see how we're doing. Yes, it may be a bit embarrassing, but we're in the process of change, and the more that we can share what we observe, what we're doing, what we're not doing, the more it can open up pathways to change. But when we change, we should celebrate. We should celebrate our successes and collectively pat ourselves on the back in a workplace where we are doing things well. And you think of a country like Canada, for example, where we have people from all over the world, and Indigenous peoples who have tens of thousands of years here of developing their knowledge. And if we don't build our institutions, whether it's our state institutions or our research institutions, our companies, our educational institutions, if we don't build them in a way that is able to draw on and capitalize on and learn from, just this wealth of humanity, we're doing ourselves a disservice. Like, this isn't about just, let's, say the right thing or be, quote, politically correct. This is just about being smart. This is just about being practical. This is about being thoughtful. This is about how do we guarantee the best future for all of us. And what we know from all the research, that the more unequal a society, the worse are the outcomes for everyone. And so the more equal we can be, whether it's around women's rights or the rights of different parts of the population who've faced discrimination over the past and bigotry, the more we can undo and overcome those forms of inequality, actually the better it is for all of us. So this agenda of change, when we talk about male allyship or other forms of allyship, it isn't about guilt. It's not about puffing ourselves up to say, look how good I am. It's just about doing the smart thing. It's about thinking with consideration. It's about thinking with love. It's about learning to listen. We're saying the number one thing you need here is humility. You've got to start with what you don't know, not with what you know. You can't start with how good you are at your field. You have to start with so much I have to learn about, what I don't know about the lives of women at work and beyond, the lives of First Nation people, lives of someone who have a different gender or sexual identity than I have. And then to know, how do we do it? Well, the first tool is to listen. Is to listen, not to say that person I'm talking to knows everything, but just I'm here to learn. Women's voices have been suppressed, have been ridiculed for thousands of years, have been marginalized. And so if we want to learn about the lives of women and the situation women face, whether it's at work or in the community, in education, in the sciences, we just listen, just take it in and be willing to think about, geez, do I think that? Do I do that? So listening not just with our heads and our very good brains, but listen with our hearts, listen with our emotions, to take it in and to try to integrate that into self-knowledge of equality. It is absolutely critical that men take action. The men speak out as allies. The men look at our own words and behavior. The men are there in solidarity and as leaders.